Facelift.
We are talking Future Kick. This is a 1991 movie directed by Damien Klaus and stars Don the Dragon Wilson as Walker and Meg Evelyn Foster. Now, in the early 90s and kind of late 80s, we had a slew of cyborg and android-related movies on the back of the Terminator and RoboCop. This is one. Don Wilson has done a few of these kind of like cyborg-esque style movies. This one was produced by Roger Corman and uses footage from previous movies, in particular Crime Zone and Battle Beyond the Stars. Now, the story of this one's actually relatively convoluted in a weird way, although it does have a strangely basic plot as well. So, there you go. The setup is quite heavy. So we have a future where crime is rampant, the earth is kind of on its knees, people have, living on the moon to try and get away from it. Among all this, we have a situation where corporations have ultimately taken place instead of government, and they have created androids to be the policemen of the future. Now, these androids have done their job well and were, super tough. But they ended up deciding that the corporations were the biggest criminals and then turned on them. And now those same androids are being hunted by the corporate police. Don the Dragon Wilson is one of those, and that's just his backstory before we even get into the film. We also have Meg Foster's character, whose husband is kind of like a rich kind of tech billionaire who is an inventor, and he is kind of has a couple of different kind of like things under his belt. He's doing some type of VR work for kind of entertainment and things like that. But he also ends up kind of getting involved in the harvest of body parts, where this has now become big business, and there's an illegal body harvesting operation going on. And that really is like the crux of the film, as he ends up getting murdered. Meg Foster wants to kind of find out what happened, and she ultimately hires a Walker to help her. So the complex kind of setup for this movie is certainly probably the most interesting thing, because the setup has got so many kind of like backstory and exposition. You would expect the movie to be as kind of complex as that, but it isn't. It's more of just a kind of like running away from the bad guys movie, but with a extremely convoluted setup. It's not to say that there isn't anything that I didn't like about this movie, because there actually is. I actually think this is stronger than some of the kind of like the examples of these type of genre. I mean, their setup is interesting. There's no kind of getting away from it, but ultimately, I don't know if we A, needed this such complicated setup, or B, whether that would have made maybe a better story rather than kind of the more or less, cyborgs on the run type film that we ended up getting. But I did enjoy the kind of the world building in this one. The kind of like the dirty, scummy kind of earth that this movie depicts, where there's a scene, for example, where Meg Foster's going to the police station to ultimately follow up on the murder of her husband. And the policewoman there ultimately tells her there's at least 100 murders a day in that precinct alone. And she has to take a ticket, and they'll get back in with her in a couple of days. So there's kind of like, the police don't really care, they're massively overworked, there's massive kind of like corporate corruption, and we get a kind of very much a kind of a cyberpunk sort of feel to this. There's kind of dirty bars where everyone's kind of got an angle, virtual reality tournaments, things like this, people kind of selling information. So I actually think the world building of this movie is done fairly well, and you kind of get a good sense that there's actually there could be at least a hell of a lot of going on with all these kind of things. There's also some actually quite good gore effects in this movie. I mean, it's not gratuitous in the fact that we don't see loads of it all the time, there are a couple of instances where we get some reasonable prosthetic kind of blood effects, things like this. There's a scene, for example, where a guy gets his head knocked off with a kind of a swinging ladder. Later on, we get someone else's kind of head exploding, things like this. There are a couple of instances with some decent gore effects that look pretty good, and actually relatively gory as well. I actually think Meg Foster has quite an interesting character here, because she's playing someone who's very kind of naive to this world, if that makes sense, and you can just see her, you know, almost staring headlong into danger without really realising it, which makes her feel genuinely vulnerable, and how people can take advantage of her. But I also like the fact that we have some characters that maybe you'd expect to take advantage of and don't, and end up being more decent than maybe you would kind of think, although there are plenty of kind of scumbags out there as well. Don the Dragon Wilson, I actually think does not a terrible job in this movie. He's very variable, I say. I think it depends on who he's being directed by, because I have seen some awful performances by him, but this one I think he does fine for the kind of the movie that it's trying to be. And, you know, he pretty much wears his sunglasses the whole movie. And that was always one of the kind of the iconic images with the Terminator is Arnie with his kind of shades on, and Don the Dragon Wilson pretty much wears in the entire film, which I thought was quite fun. There are plenty of kind of fight scenes here, and you know, there's some decent kind of cinematography involved here to kind of showing you this seedy world. So what doesn't work? It's obviously a very cheap film, and all the trappings that happen with that are here too. And it kind of does really, the ambition that I think it sets up, it can't really be matched by the budget. And as I've said, it depends on how you feel about reusing stock footage, because this movie does it quite a lot. And you almost feel like they are, like, what have we got to use? And let's kind of write around that. So there's a little bit of kind of cheapness in regards to that. I think as the movie progresses, it gets more and more kind of generic, if we're being honest. It's a strong setup with a hell of a lot going on, and as I say, maybe too much, to be honest. And as the film progresses, it gets more and more just kind of like running and shooting, and ultimately gets kind of generic and a little bit dull at the end of the day. There are some silly things as well here. We get, for example, we're told multiple times that Walker is the last android, and yet the computer is always trying to identify who it is, and like, well, there's only one left, you've already established this. Things like this. So there's kind of like silly kind of moments where it's obviously not particularly thought out, but let's be honest, Roger Corman Productions, they're never really cerebral masterpieces anyway. I don't think it really has a hell of a lot of big set pieces, this film. It's like, there's not really any like massive like stunts or kind of elaborate sort of set pieces. It's all just kind of somewhat by the numbers in regards to its kind of action sequences. And then we have to talk about the ending itself. The end of the movie, I actually got to say, I think I appreciated it more now than I watched this when I first watched this back in the VHS days. The ending, you either kind of like think, oh, that's kind of quite fun and clever, I didn't see that coming, or you'll just be like, man, that really pissed me off. I have to be honest with you, I think it would be the latter for probably 4 out of 5 people, but, you know, having watched this, and to be honest with you, not being massively invested in it, I actually thought the ending was kind of, in a way, quite fun, and will remind you of certain other films that I won't kind of say, otherwise it will give the game away. Overall, this movie isn't terrible. I think there's some good story elements that are introduced. I think not enough is done with them, and this could have been a more interesting film had it focused on certain things that the movie tried to set up at the beginning, but instead ultimately becomes a generic kind of chase fight movie. But there are worse examples. I'll give this one a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.